Good afternoon or good morning. Welcome to the committee that sometimes is just referred to as finance, but its full name is Budget, Finance, and Growth Committee. We have a crowd today, at least by our current standards, a crowd. I'm glad to have some guests and hope that some folks out there are also with us remotely. And Mr. Wilson will tell you how to participate remotely right now.
Thank you. To speak during this speaking of the public session, please click the hand icon at the bottom of your screen in the first 15 minutes of the meeting. We will then ask for your name, school association, and your association to the district. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. We'll start at the top of the agenda right now, which is highlights regarding financial reports. We do this for those we do this on a monthly basis. Properly so, and we'll also have our treasurer introduce those folks that would be speaking. Treasurer Wagner is there, and I have to start over there with you. We all have to introduce ourselves first. Get it.
Okay, I'm Brian Kennedy. I'm the fixed asset administrator in the treasurer's office.
That's Dover. I'm Jen Wagner, the treasurer.
Brandon Craig, school board.
Steve Bolton, school board member.
Ben Lindsay, board president, not on this committee, but just
Renting it.
Kevin Ashland, I'm the director of financial reporting and transparency.
Brittany Hughes, the assistant treasurer in the treasurer's office. Hi, I'm Brenda Diamond, I'm the manager of the state and federal grants.
Good morning, Cynthia Walters with Green Umbrella, Green Schoolyards Coordinator, CPS Outside.
I'm Marcia Futel, citizen today.
Phyllis Davis, the board's administrative assistant.
Rob Wilson, Tech.
Thank you. Jen, you'll introduce.
Yeah, so for our monthly financial reporting, we will first have Kevin Ashley do the financials, then Ty will do state and federal grants, and Ms. Hughes will do the CRA update. Kevin.
Awesome. So we're just going to do a brief highlight of the financials. So we'll go to the next slide, just has a summary, key takeaways, and I'll talk about those. I'll go ahead and show the slides and then talk about those on the slides. So go back, I think, 2 slides where it says cash balance and encumbrances. This is a comparison of the end of April this year versus the last 2 years in April. You can see our cash balance is up a little bit. Part of that sometimes is due to timing of tax settlements. I do know this year we got a large TIF payment from the city that came in April, and I believe last year. So that was a $10 million bump that we got just due to timing this year. You'll see encumbrances are down. Part of that's an effort to get those done with year income and keeping that on track. The next slide does a revenue comparison. And as we've done the last couple of months, the light blue bars indicate essentially that pass-through funding that we received ultimately went to school or other scholarship transfers. So the dark blue lines is more representative of that net revenue over the last 2 years versus this year and where we are in terms of the budget. We've received all of our tax revenue at this point, so that's our big chunk of money that comes more sporadically. State funding comes, equally throughout the year. We've already received our tax revenue. The next slide just does a comparison, breaking down that revenue a little bit into the categories. The big one that looks different there is going to be the state foundation, and because of the pass-through funding. Next slide is expenditure comparison. Another thing we tried to do here with the light blue is showing those deductions related to pass-through to kind of do a better comparison, a net comparison for the 3 years, and then blue again represents the column. You'll notice too, we're projecting a little bit of an underspend at this point versus the working budget, which included the prior year period as well. Next slide, this is kind of capturing some of that underspend as well. The unallocated budget relates non-salary, non-transfers, and at this point was not encumbered at the end of April. There was a period where requisitions were still entered the first part of May, so that will change. 2 slides back is just some highlights on school-wide pool expenditures. Obviously, expenditures have been up this year, primarily related to collective bargaining agreements, most of those expenditures. The next slide is where we have been tracking the unallocated budget. Essentially, most of the funds that are non-salary have been, and we may have some other salaries, but at this point, we were going to budget versus actual allocated for salary and benefits. 2 slides back is the preschool information. One thing I want to point out here, kind of in the middle column at the bottom, shows as of April 2022, there were about 892 preschool students receiving some sort of tuition assistance. Last year, so coming out of COVID, it was about 608. The year before that, which was right at the start of COVID, was about 833.
Tuition assistance from the levy, not other tuition assistance.
The total of that is,
Total number of students is 1,999. So 892 are receiving benefit as last dollar in from the preschool levy.
And then the last page, the last slide just does a comparison of the revenues related specifically to that levy and what's allocated. And that's all I have on those slides.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes. On the, in general, but I guess more specifically to the preschool, is the expected, is there an expected growth that will be there that in the program, or in general, in some of our programs that would increase costs?
I was just going to make that point. So if you look at that, go back, I'm sorry, Rob, go back to that last slide he had, where the payment to United Way is $7 million. Their budget for next year draft, when the last time we saw the committee was in November. So 11 million to 15 million is like exceeding how we split the funds. And so they're going to be creeping into the prior year cash savings from primarily from the first half of the levy. The first year, we only collected our full year levy, but we had, because of the calendar year, we spent half of that. So they were taking the first half of collections, putting it at the back end of the levy. Then year after year, as they were ramping up, they were consistently underspending the budget. So we have this cash balance that Hector's currently working on. And then with their projections and working with Vera and our projections, how we're going to chew through that savings, so to speak, so we can plan ahead of how we're going to handle that. So that will be, CPP's not ready to unveil that yet, so we're trying to stay in sync with each other with our budgets, and so that information will be coming. Good question, thank you.
questions?
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. The state and federal grants, the signed spreadsheet.
You speak up a little bit.
It's your friend. Put a happy face on it. I know.
So this is the monthly summary of our CPS grants. First grade, line at the bottom, that's grants. 38 public grants, state and federal, that represent $75 million. And of those grants, we have spent, the year-to-date average spend is 47%. The second section, Second gray line is a summary of our ESSER funding, the funding that we that we formalized. So we have a total of 9 of those grants that total $325 million. And to date, we have spent 37% of those grants. And I would just like to point out, ESSER 1 will begin in September of this year, and we have spent 93% of those grants. ESSER 2 and 3, we still have those available. ESSER 2, we have spent 94% of that funding, and that funding will expire next year. And then for ESSER 3, we have spent 7% of that grant funding. The bottom section, the last third gray line, represents the non-public grants, which we have a total of 9 of those grants that total $21 million. And of those grants, we have spent 64% of those. The next slide is a graphical representation of the ESSER. So the blue bar, $328 million, represents the 4-year total budget. And of that $328 million, the green bar next to that represents the 100%. The second blue graph, the $130 million, is specifically for fiscal year 22. So that is the budget for fiscal year 22, and of that amount, $102 million.
And this is a combination of all ESSER grants.
Correct. All of those 9 grants. And then the next chart is a chart of the state and federal grants. And so that is a chart.
Was.
Not yet.
We like to try to.
Oh, you did.
And so this is a 5-month average year-to-date by month for the current year, which it's being compared to prior years. So last year in April, we had 50. This year in April, we have 47%. But I do want to grants and then additional. So without that additional funding, we would have been at a 50%. And then also I'll point out that we do have $4 million additional state and federal funding this year as opposed to last year. And we're still on target as I said.
And that additional $400,000 has to be spent by June, right? So we can spend it fast.
Yes.
You have any plans for it? Vacation home?
Yeah. It came, and then we showed the requisition system, so we're gonna.
But you will.
Yes.
Any questions on the state federal grants?
I just have a question if I could. Could you, I don't necessarily need to repeat, but you mentioned ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. It sounded like both ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 are pretty well done.
Yes, ESSER 1, 93% spend, and then ESSER 2, 94% spend.
ESSER 1 was only $20 million.
Gotcha.
We do that pretty quickly.
Well,
ESSER 2 was $92 million.
Yeah, so ESSER 1 is really just the carryover that we, yes.
Yeah. So when we talk about ESSER funds that are remaining that still could be used or impact what we're doing, has any of that ESSER 3 already been committed?
Well, we adopted a 3-year plan for
Right.
ESSER 2 and 3.
Right?
And Monday night, you're going to have a complete update on that. But yeah, some of it was already committed. And we've already started spending ESSER 3.
Right. And we'll have the board will have an opportunity to see what has been spent of 3 and what is remaining.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And propose revisions to the budget for 23 and 24.
Great. So that will be the opportune time for the board to participate in understanding that and impacting that. Thank you.
Sure.
Sir.
Thanks, Chair Bolton.
Thank you.
I think for Mr. Craig, who's not in policy, what I shared there is I'm trying to go to all the committee meetings and ask the same couple questions just to help familiarize myself. And so the two questions I've been asking are, can you help me understand how this is on the agenda? And then is there any action being recommended to the full board?
I wrote down, having lived through last committee, I wrote down where all of these are coming from, just for my
Oh,
president.
look at that. Look at that.
Yes.
What an
So
efficiency
that we
win.
don't have to ask it since there's 10 things on the agenda. But no, it's very helpful. It does allow us to rethink what we're doing and do stuff right. The only recommendation that'll be coming out of here will be the minutes. There's no, you're not asking for any action or nothing has to be done via the district.
We're just reporting on the financial status of the progress of the data of the district.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right, next.
Except Kim will be making a recommendation
Yes,
for the
she
board.
will. We're not there yet.
Hello.
Hello.
Speak up. So I have submitted 5 CRAs for the Finance Committee review. These CRAs will be submitted at the next board meeting for full board review. We have, again, 5 CRAs, and they are ranging in the years of agreements between 12 and 15 years. They are, making remodeling of existing structures or constructing new structures, and they are going to be converted or built into residential spaces, senior living and retirement living units, family units, which I'm sure
Okay, cool.
Ms. Bolton will be happy
That's
to hear.
right. You tell those city people to get busy and get some families in here.
Right, so we can get more students
You
enrolled.
got it.
Right, and they're going to be converting to commercial retail spaces and commercial office spaces. So these 5, again, have been submitted for your review. I have continued to reach out to Mr. Banish to see when and if we could get a presentation for the Finance Committee. So the last time I reached out, he did commit to a presenter. However,
All
they've
right.
still not committed to a date because he said they're still working through the changes that are being made to the CRA process, and they don't feel comfortable with presenting until all of those details have been finalized. So I will continue to reach out to Mr. Banish for a date for their team to come and present to Finance Committee.
Fantastic. And I appreciate your persistence.
My pleasure.
That's right.
Which item is that?
It's in this number 1 still.
We're
Still
number
number
1.
Mhm.
So if it's the committee's, with the committee's approval, we will add this to the treasurer's report on
Yes.
Monday night as a revision.
As
On
you
Monday
do
morning.
monthly.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Next up, the inventory.
So
Folks.
fixed assets,
Fixed
participated
assets.
in internal.
Brian, you have to be at a microphone.
Sorry.
You come here. I don't think she's coming.
So fixed assets participated in a internal audit review of policies, procedures, and actions. And one of the recommendations was to update the board policy. So we reviewed 7450 and 7455. And we're making small changes to 7450 to make a more concise statement to the policy. And then 7455, it was recommended that we update the useful lives that are on the policy to be in line with our annual comprehensive financial report that we complete. And so that's the recommendations that we have presented.
You should have a red line copy of
We
it.
do.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
And so is the proper protocol, once it goes here, it goes to policy committee for adoption? Is that correct?
Yes, I'm laughing because if I recall, did it happen at the board meeting or where was it that it was said that something would be going to policy, and I think the treasurer said, and it goes to finance first if it's a financial policy.
In the past few
Well,
years,
that's what's supposed to
finance
happen.
committee did all the
Did all of them.
policies, right, all the
So,
financial policies.
so they're here, and these are the 2 that we're worrying about, or the one, let's see, the 700, so the accounting system for fixed assets,
Mhm.
and then the property inventory.
Mhm.
And you just told us what the big changes are, which are not huge, but
Correct.
you need to
Just bringing it
explain them a little
along.
bit more. Is there any?
So basically, the biggest change that occurred is the useful life is being updated. It's going to match what we have controlled in the system and report in our financial report. And it's the one is going to go. Basically, they were a larger grouping of years, and we're going more precise years. So we're going from 10 to 20 years down to 20 years, from 30 to 50 years to 7 to 45 years, from 3 to 15 years down to the 5 to 7 years, and that's what's enacted in our system, and is how it rolls over into our financial reports.
Cool. So that's past practice is why it's here. It's just policy starts, financial policy starts here.
So.
In other policies, that's not necessarily the case, but it is for finance.
Correct. So we'll submit those to policy for the next month's review.
Yes.
Yes.
So this, Ms. Davis will go on policy agenda that you've started already. And I don't know if any members have any issues about it. The treasurer is suggesting this is what we need to do.
Yes, ma'am.
Great. So for the administration's advice.
One question.
Sir.
Can you, I understand the idea that a policy starts that is financial related would start in finance. Can you just say more about the origin story of like this change, like what's happening in the world that led us to want to do this and when that came up? I don't remember this part of the board meeting.
Are you talking about the process, or are you talking specifically about the changes in the policy?
The specific changes in this policy.
I think the CAFR rules changed, and we just are now getting around to updating the policy to match the CAFR rules. Is that correct?
We probably have tweaked the CAFR rules. I believe this actual policy that's on board docs was last approved in 2018, 2019. And it probably was just some language that needed updating in the policy. I don't think from Brian and I's standpoint, it's been any change in practice. It's really, at least since then, it's just been that it needs to be a tweak to the policy.
Who makes the CAFR rules?
It's Government Finance Officers Association. It's the accounting regulation rules.
I got you. Great.
The little award we get every year.
We get so many awards, Jen.
I know.
It's just that's helpful for the.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah.
All right. Next.
Oh, that would be me.
That would be you.
So the first thing on the agenda is a revision of the treasurer's goals based on feedback from the finance committee from last month. I added the one goal related to the levy, passage of the levy. There you go. It's purple at the bottom. And we've already started with public engagement events, so I'm well on my way. So the levy cycle, the treasurer evaluation cycle is bizarre compared to everybody else's. It starts in May and ends in February because you're supposed to do my evaluation in March, right? And so I submit these as revised for adoption by the board on Monday night. No, you want the minutes won't go through Monday night, will they?
No, they won't.
Okay, so for the next board meeting.
But we are adopting these if we agree with them based upon you submitting it over 2 different months and us thinking it was great and doing an addition. Super.
Yep.
Any questions, comments? Any additional recommendations? Yes, sir.
I feel good about how this got here. And I feel good about what the recommendations.
Well, we're so happy you feel good.
Yeah.
I woke up today. How can I make Ben happy?
That's it. That's the only reason I wanted to be a board member.
That's right.
I just wanted to, what are the actual targets?
Numeric?
Yeah, so I see categories, but if we're going to approve goals for the year for the treasurer, I want to read some targets associated with them.
Okay.
I wasn't sure if that's coming now or later.
It will be coming soon.
That's good. So with that reference, you would see targets possible. No reason to work on those necessarily until we said yes. So you said yes, and you're going to have those for us. Next time when the full board adopts it, which won't be next Monday, but the following board meeting with targets.
So the first time there will be a discussion of the targets
For the whole board.
is when the board's being asked to approve.
Yes, not before.
Okay, I just want that's totally fine. I just want to make sure we save enough time for that in the meeting. Because I feel like that's
Write
an
it down.
important discussion.
Because you know,
So this
Jen takes a lot of our time.
So this would be at what board meeting then would we be talking about this?
So
June 13th is the next board meeting.
June 13th. So I will make sure we save some time for
That'd be
that.
great.
Thank you.
Joy.
Next,
Okay, so, next slide. So, thank you for passing the first tax levy resolution. We submitted it to the county auditors, and within like 3 days, they had it certified and back to us, which is impressive. Tammy
And
did.
unusual.
Yes. Anyway, so I have a little summary up here I thought was very interesting. So last time we renewed this, I'm hoping you can see the data, but in November 2017, the millage rate was 8.43. The estimated cost to a homeowner for a market value of $100,000 was $248 per year. And with this millage restating, because the valuation's gone up, their actual property tax bill will go down to $200. So I thought that was kind of cool. And so we need to pass the second resolution. And I'm proposing that we do that at the June 13th board meeting, if that's okay with the committee.
it's not gonna be able to be done Monday, so the next opportunity, you wanna do it as early as you can. So
Correct.
13th, if you'll add that.
Then we can get a good issue number if we go early.
Uh-oh, issue number. Number one.
Because once you pass that resolution is when Dan and I will take it to Board of Elections and submit it to get on the ballot.
Ms. Davis, do you have that? Let me ask if I could, a question on that. I mean, the discussion of passing that resolution, the board has taken the action
Yes,
to go and be on the ballot
Yes.
for this renewal.
yes.
Would you anticipate, are there other parts of that discussion that need to happen in order to pass that resolution?
I don't think so. It's a standard ballot language that you just formally have to adopt. I have to certify your vote and then take it to the Board of Elections.
Thank you. Any questions? You good?
I probably will mention during that meeting this change in
Oh, please
dollar value.
do,
Absolutely.
because that's gotta be good.
Yeah.
And keep emphasizing the renewal piece of this.
Okay,
You might have to explain it a little bit more than you just did.
I will.
Okay.
Okay, so would you mind if we just kept going with the budget thing before we get to 5-year forecast? So Rob doesn't have
Absolutely.
to switch PowerPoints. You already did you? He's so good. He's so far ahead of me.
Well, he actually writes the agenda for all the committee meetings. Mr. Lindy doesn't really know that, but it's really, it's.
Don't put that kind of.
So this is kind of like the beginning of Monday's presentation, high level summary, but the agenda specifically talked about committee feedback, and so I wanted to give an opportunity for you all to give feedback. So next slide. So the budget target is 609 million, very clear, submitted based off the last forecast and what we knew about district revenues and projected expenses. Next slide. Challenges to building the budget was one question that was asked. There's a lot going on with COVID, supply demand issues, so our expenses aren't coming out necessarily the way we'd planned. We had a significant change in the state funding formula. Some things are still being tweaked. We had a meeting with Aaron Roush, the Director of Finance from ODE yesterday, the urban treasurers and I, and learned of some other changes. Nothing that's significant for fiscal year 23, but as they're refining their formulas, we're seeing changes in ours. But the biggest two impacts to our budget, not necessarily a challenge to creating the budget, but challenge to understanding the budget from the public's perspective, is that elimination of pass-through funding. So our revenues went down, but so did our tuition expense. And then the student wellness that was outside of the formula in a state grant is now under the formula, so is now subject to our state share, which we got richer in this formula we went from 46 to 43% state share with the elimination of all those pass-through students. We are no longer the richest urban district. Columbus moved ahead of us. So, but we are still a challenge. So that student wellness money last year received 12.5 million. This year received 3.5 because it's reduced to 43% of a dollar. We are in the middle of strategic plans, and so district initiatives are not necessarily as clear as they were. We redesigned the budget process, so that was a challenge. We discontinuing school-wide pools, so that's a challenge in terms of comparative data. Kevin will go into that a little bit in the 5-year forecast. And of course, we had to impact the first stage of the cliff coming back. We did, and transition with the new superintendent, kind of put a halt on some of our progress. She's very brilliant and is caught up, and we're working well together. And then the last one was, of course, the levy. So making sure that we sustain enough cash to continue our operations. Next slide. My favorite picture of the world, my second favorite picture of the world now, is the cliff. Just reminding everybody that this year we'd anticipated $5 million of student wellness expenses to hit the general fund, as well as $6 million of ESSER funding. So we kept our budget flat from 609 to 609, from 22 to 23. And without us doing one new thing, our budget went up by $11 million because of the cliff, and it went up another $18 million because of collective bargaining impact, right? So there's no room for new stuff unless you take away old stuff. Okay, next slide. So this was the planned cliff for fiscal year 23, so $6.2 million. We hired a crisis communicator, and she was fully funded at ESSER, and then each year we're bringing more back into the general fund. We had an uptick in our general counsel and our liability insurances and some general counsel expenses due to COVID, and so they have now returned to the general fund. We were going to bring back the Promise Center to the general fund, but because we had that gap, we decided to leave it in there for one more year, so at $2.5 million. Athletics and extracurricular. So if you recall, during COVID, we stopped doing sports and stopped doing clubs for a while. We used pandemic funds to help us restore to normal levels. So that restoration is now back in the general fund with some growth, because with the collective bargaining agreements, all the stipends increased by COLA rates. And then we brought back the district-wide mentors into the general fund. So there was 10 or 12 of them, I think. And so now it's instead of 6.2, we have an addition of $4 million into the general fund. Next slide. This is my first favorite slide now. So it's we can't keep adding new stuff to a finite revenue without new money or a reduction in other things. Okay, next slide. So where are we? As of Monday night, so every Monday night I get a new budget extract. We were at $634,700,000 in the general fund, which left us with a gap of 26. So remember in February, the last time I presented in public, we had a $50 million. Well, we did some cleanup and some corrections and funding source changes. And if your next slide shows some things that we've been working on this week. So we found a possible duplication. I got confirmation last night. There was a duplication of $5.5 million in the Department of Student Services budget. So automatically that's a reduction. We're looking at the sick leave pool revision. So if you recall, we hired 163 super subs so that were tied to a building, so they weren't floating between buildings and carrying germs across the district. That has lessened the pain in our budget on paying out sick leave and for long-term subs, for long-term illnesses. And so we might tweak that for next year. We're not really sure what the absentee rate is going to be like next year, so it's going to be an educated guess, with possibility of freezing vacant positions and not filling them to help close that gap, or shifting to finding ideas of new things that could be shifted to other funds. And then the superintendent is working on a reorganization plan, so we might be repurposing some positions to help close that gap. Next slide. So that's kind of a preview. We'll go into much more detail on Monday night. I'm working on that PowerPoint as we speak. Any questions?
Just a couple we don't work on Monday, but as you're thinking through the areas where we need to cut in order to get down to that 609 target, one of the things I'm optimistic we'll be able to do with the public is to share, can you talk about how you're looking at impact from the past year, and then ways that we're choosing to scale up things that seem to be having a bigger impact, scaling down things that seem to be having a smaller impact. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, so I don't know that we'll have all that ready for Monday night, because like I said, this data changes on an hourly basis at this point during this part of the process. But the financial impact tool that we've coined, that was introduced to me from you, shows a major spend, the impact it has on a dollar impact on it has on a per pupil, and then the desired outcomes, and then what are the results of those outcomes are. And so we can determine whether we're getting the best bang for our buck, and if this spend is really working the way we wanted it to, and if not, then we can reinvest in something else. And so it's a new learned behavior. And so we're working, we haven't really cut anything yet, so I don't have anything to apply to it yet.
Yeah.
We've just been refining our estimates and,
Yeah.
But so I am committed to doing that in the cycle before you adopt the budget.
That's great. About when do you think?
Before your next public presentation, not including the town hall on the 31st. So next time we come to the board meeting and do a presentation is when we'll have more specifics about things that we're choosing not to fund or recommend for funding, or things that we're recommending to increase funding for. Either way.
Is that the 13th?
Yes.
Doesn't have to be. I'm not pushing for it one way or the other.
Yeah, no, it needs to be a series of, because it needs to be get feedback, revise. So it needs to be a series of, because you have to adopt by the 23rd.
Yeah, we don't pull out.
27th.
Yeah.
So there's 3 meetings in June, right? Because we converted the COW meeting on the 22nd to a business meeting so that we can start processing the year contracts. And so there's 3 opportunities to go to in front of the board before you vote.
So you figure we'll see it before we vote on the 27th. So either the 13th
Yes.
or the 22nd.
Or both.
Or both.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Any other questions? I just have a couple of comments. A comment particularly about the challenge being between strategic plans.
Mhm.
I try to view that as an opportunity. Because we're not beholden to doing anything in particular except what the district needs doing. And it'd be great to have that time of emptiness, so to speak, to start to envision something else. So I think it's an opportunity, as long as we don't, and I say this as the president, as long as we don't wait so long to get working on the strategic plan that we lose another year or 18 months because we're having, we didn't start the plan soon, didn't start planning the plan. But is it possible, since this is significant to be in, I see Marcia over there and the strategic plan and what have you, is it possible that the administration, in the midst of these very difficult, heavy business time, that we will see at least some kind of significant summary of what we did do and what we didn't do in the strategic plan? Because that has to impact thinking forward. I mean, there are things that needed to be jettisoned or had to be. COVID came and did this or whatever and changed what we were doing.
So I can
Can you talk to the
I could talk to the superintendent about that, and we could do that. And there are some things that we went way beyond.
Exactly.
Like a nurse in every building and a school social worker in every elementary school, and expanded the counselors beyond what I think the original. So yes, I will talk to the superintendent about that.
I just think that would be helpful moving on, and I think that would help us understand what might still need doing. And the other thing, besides the strategic plan, again, I think where we fail maybe the most is reviewing of the contracts that we have. I would like to know what you all have done, because there's been lots of promises made about reviewing contracts, both the district-wide and also the school-based ones.
Mm-hmm. So we did talk about that not last night, the night before last. And we are intending to implement a new process with this new cycle of contracts that are being submitted for approval for the year, is that they have to submit them with their measures before I'll put them in the treasurer's report. But we're talking about consolidating, because we're balancing between a system of independent operating schools and site-based management and central administration and efficiency, right? And so when every school does their own contract for the same thing with different vendors, or even with the same vendor, we're not getting efficiencies on that. So we talked about consolidating those because we spent a lot of money with certain vendors, but I'm not sure that we're getting the best bang for our buck there. Not that they're not providing the right service financially. And so we are working through that.
But then when we commit, or we have to vote on a 5-year contract, I mean, we're dedicating ourselves to another decade of something, practically. I mean, and I know there's money to be made in the length of a contract. I got that, but I just think this is I think there's money to be had.
I agree. And we don't typically recommend 5-year contracts on anything. Very special things that way.
Because I know we did, and the board approved, but all the special vendors, transportation vendors that we passed a few months ago, several months ago now, 4 months ago, those were all 5-year contracts. And there was some hint or a suggestion that indeed there was some way within each of those contracts, because of performance on an annual basis and us holding them accountable, that there was some great flexibility or manipulation. But I would hate for us to come forward with a great transportation plan, at least for Yellow Bus. Metro, we don't know yet, but Yellow Bus, and then be hogtied, if you will, based upon us having less flexibility than I think we were kind of assured we'd have. So just if you can be following up on that. I know that's not your
absolutely
bailiwick, but gotcha.
He's so quiet down there.
Yeah, he's hoping to not be noticed.
Okay.
It's a good lawyer trick.
So
he's just eavesdropping, or we call it Dan dropping.
Yeah, that got his attention.
He heard his name.
Okay.
So go ahead.
So are you okay with us moving on to the forecast?
Yeah. Do we have any public folks that chimed in?
We do not.
Okay. I'm just thinking, I know that I believe yours, Cynthia, was sort of related to announcing something that's going to happen, and also, making a play for some budget, so we could let's have our guest, if you would, testify, and that'll be a little bit of a break before we get into some of these longer ones. That would be super. We're glad you're here.
Refreshing to call me a break. Thank you very much.
You are a break. A refreshing break.
All right. So as I said before, I'm Cynthia Walters, and I'm with Green Umbrella. So CPS Outside is an alliance of partner organizations working together to ensure all CPS students have equitable access to nature and green spaces for outdoor experiential learning. So to date, CPS Outside has supported or is dedicated to the district to help improve the health and wellness, social, emotional, behavioral, and academic outcomes to students. So to date, we have been conducting site assessments of schools needing usable green space with the kind participation of community organizations. We have been leveraging community partners' resources to serve students and educators. And we've been working on aligning the next generation science standards with outdoor learning. I've been working directly with CPS facilities to install 16 new outdoor learning classrooms next school years using ESSER funds. We are working on developing a partnership with the municipal sewer district, who has dedicated $200,000 for a stormwater infrastructure at LEAP Academy. And after all that rain we had last evening and the flooding that they're experiencing at LEAP Academy, and if we couple this with an outdoor space learning lab that engages students, it's beneficial for all parties. So that really hit home as I heard the rain and the thunder last evening, and I was worried about Leap Academy because I was just there yesterday. This model at Leap Academy will engage both the school and the community by having them select a design that benefits their neighborhood. We've been supporting the curriculum and instruction department, who is providing educators with funding this school year to connect their students with outdoor programming such as food trips would be great, but field trips and and also the wonderful program that I'm learning more and more about, Summer Scholars. Being a member of the District Wellness Committee to help use policies to ensure the sustainability of outdoor learning programs. Facilitating working groups to integrate teacher PD, curriculum, out-of-school programming, and workforce skills to empower students and educators. Specialized outdoor learning packages for rising star students, identifying the importance of engaging children at a young age to make outdoor learning part of the school climate pre-K through graduation. And last but not least, developing an ag ed curriculum with the outcome being nutritionally secure students and families who have equitable access to locally grown food. So I look forward to building a collaborative program designed to create individual school teams, integrated professional learning, and curriculum that will also include providing data to demonstrate improved student learning outcomes. I also want to be intentional by giving students a voice and collaborating with the city and community members to include schools in the new Green Cincinnati plan. This is year one of expanding CPS green schoolyards. We are just getting started. There are still plans for 14 learning gardens and 2 playscapes that currently need funding. Can we count on ESSER funding to drive these projects beyond the next school year? And can we put our heads together to identify funding in the years to come to sustain outdoor education for CPS students? Thinking about that, and in the meantime, I would like to personally invite all of you to the kickoff event June 9th. Many of you are receiving the save the date and an invitation in your mailbox today or tomorrow. And we are starting at Leap Academy to realize what these projects can look like. We will move on to Rothenberg Rooftop Garden. You're all invited for lunch. And we're going to have a vision sharing session for all CPS staff that is going to be facilitated by the national cohort that we're working with, Children and Nature Network. And then the following day, we're going to end high school, which is another realization of where we can be throughout the district for all students at CPS outside. So thank you very much for your time and energy.
Well, thank you. Thanks for requesting some time to speak. And Treasurer has a question for you.
I do. So, having married a guy who got into agricultural economics, is this like a college, like is the long-term measure to get more kids into the ag profession?
Workforce.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And then is this proposal that you're asking for funding, have you submitted it to curriculum?
Facilities.
To facilities.
To facilities director. James Boyd and I are working together on this to embark on these new projects. He's allocated and has let me know what the funding is available, which is the $180,000 for these 16 outdoor classrooms. We had, based on 20 site assessments, had asked to do the learning gardens and also sensory gardens for the rising stars and then also playscapes. But that funding did not reach that amount. So we are just working with outdoor classrooms, thinking that school gardens can be add-ons, playscapes can be add-ons to these spaces. So those are not included in the budget for next year.
But the 180,000 is just the 16 classes, not the
That is
playscape. Okay.
correct.
And then you talked about a multi-year plan. Is that been submitted to James?
Yes.
Okay.
And I appreciate the question too, because I know, having attended their last meeting over at the Civic Garden Center, on our material from last year and into this year, there was like a $700,000 amount that was part of this fiscal year that we're in, and it went through the curriculum department. So it might be interesting to see actually how much of that money was actually expended. I mean, that could be something to be thinking about. Other questions, sir?
Yeah, the same ones, just, can you help me understand how this got on the agenda? And then is there a recommendation that's going to the full board or not?
No, just the minutes, no recommendation, unless you want to say, let's go outside
No.
and spend all the money. The reason it's on is because I think it's an initiative that's been there, and the board has heard presentations, I think 3 presentations
I
about
didn't see it
CPS
on
outside.
Is it on the agenda?
No, but this is public speaking.
Okay, I just didn't see
Yeah,
hearing of the public.
Gotcha. No, we haven't been putting it on
Okay.
until last month, and it didn't get onto this agenda.
Okay, I was just trying to figure out, is everybody invited to give presentations like this, or was there a special invitation for this one? If so, was it?
There was a special request by Green Umbrella.
Okay,
and
but if
then-
other groups would like to come
Oh,
make a
yeah.
similar one, they should
Absolutely.
direct that to you?
Sure,
Yeah, great, okay.
as
Thank
long
you.
as it's within our work plan. and-
Right, and I just want to
the money.
reiterate that we're working with many organizations, and they would absolutely love to be invited and participate. So our working groups are made up of partner organizations and educators. So hopefully I'm speaking a bit from them, but I don't want to speak for them.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Thanks. 2 things before we move on to some of these other topics. On number 7, that is on the agenda because I think there was some confusion. Jen kind of apprised me of some confusion about the assignment at the board meeting about finding out about the dedicated fleet. And these are not the extra routes, but the dedicated fleet that we already use for athletics and field trips.
Activity buses. Yeah.
Activity buses, okay.
Mhm.
And we haven't received that yet.
Well, I didn't realize Connie wasn't going to be here, so I printed out an email that I got last night, and I can read you the responses, or I can give copies to Phyllis.
That would be fine. We don't need to-
Yeah, there was confusion. The first time I forwarded an email to her, she thought you were talking about the purchase of the buses.
Right.
Not the.
And that's what you explained
Yes.
to me, so that's why we,
Yeah, so I have a response from Josh, and then Connie added some information, so I'll make sure you get a
Fantastic.
copy of that.
we can pass it through, and then that'll be great.
Okay.
All right, and then the other one that I want to do before we do some of these other heavy topics, the number 10, the CPS city agreement on crossing guards, nurses, and did we find out, or can we find that out? I think I mentioned that when I did the research to try to figure out what we knew and what we didn't know about crossing guards, because there was some confusion about the $15 an hour. But then I went back through all the different stuff that the board has done and came up with the, and Jen, I don't know if you know this or who knows this, but at least in 2021, there's an item in treasurer's, I think this treasurer's report, yeah, to provide crossing guards for CPS students at all elementary sites from July 1, 21 through June 22. Is that city agreement that includes the crossing guards? Do we know if it is, do we know, Dan, is this you or Jen?
Sam?
Do we know if this is up, or is that just sort of an annual thing, or help us out here?
crossing guards agreement is now separate from the larger, just separate from the abatement agreement. It previously was included as an item within the abatement agreement. They're now two separate agreements. The agreement that we reached with the city, I want to say about beginning of 2020, expires this summer, and we've communicated that to security, and I believe they've started conversations about renewing that.
All right. And that agreement specifically is only about crossing guards? It doesn't
It's
include
specific
the
to
nurses
crossings.
anymore?
Nope, specific to crossing guards.
Is the nurses
Separate
too?
contract for nurses as well.
We've got those folks.
$8 million for
$8
nurses.
million for nurses. And you'll be glad to know in finance, there was a request for 21 more. Not in finance, but in policy, from a presenter. Probably would, what are you gonna do? So, at any rate, I'm just interested again in, and I would hope that the president of the board will allow us some opportunity to continue in public. And I don't know if it's an executive session or a public thing, but I still maintain that whatever we're doing is not working if we have 44 vacancies and we're paying. And I know we sent you all out about, is that what unions do they belong to, what retirement? I think you all found that out last year sometime, but even the city council folks that attended the Metro thing that the discussion that CFT arranged, the two city council people were saying, obviously it's not working. And they'd like some dialogue about that too, because they felt badly about not just the cost, it's our cost, but particularly about the vacancies and their ability to recruit versus, I think, our ability to recruit. So
and as a first step to that and follow up to the boards, we confirmed in a memo from the superintendent to the city manager that the board has approved moving that to $15 as a first step too.
And so when would you think, when would you think we would be renegotiating this contract that at least on this data says it's like it was $800,000 and now you said it'll be at least 200 and something more. So it'll be over $1 million, but we're paying $1 million to have 44 vacancies.
Well, we're not paying for the vacant positions.
No.
Well, no, I'm just saying we're not obviously getting the program that we need either. That's what I'm saying. I'm talking about value versus cost. So you have plans as to when that negotiations or that discussion starts, or who does that?
So again, the contract lives within the facilities department. The contract is not in and of itself, I think, an impediment to the program working. We have, and I think repeatedly looked to the city for a little bit more. Right now, it's just a program that they run and we pay for. I mean, we pay 100% of the costs. We pay for the manager of the program. We pay for the funny vests and the stop signs that they walk across the street. We pay for everything. Which is a major expense for us and an expense that's not necessarily borne by suburban districts and others. So we've continued to look to the city to, I think, share in the important function of assuring student pedestrian safety. That we think that's not just a school district function. At least in my opinion.
Anyplace else, it's not.
Correct. It's a shared duty, and that's the discussion. We've introduced that to the new city manager as well, John Kerp. As you know, he's a big advocate for Cincinnati Public Schools, so yes. I do think that we may have a receptive ear there.
That would be great. And we have 5 of his children.
And that's right.
5 of his children in our district.
He's terrific guy, longtime advocate for
totally
CPS.
Agree.
So,
and he mentioned that even the whole crossing guard thing, all the way back to the neighborhood summit. Back in the spring, early spring in March. So I just think we could have an opportunity here to have more of a best practice.
Agree.
Somewhere along the line. Thank you. Any other issues about that? We have a brief presentation on the 5-year forecast because you're giving a bigger one.
Other way around. This is the detail one. I'm giving an executive summary Monday night.
Oh, I tried that.
All right, Kevin, you're up.
Get it, Kevin, and then the other 2 things that will still be on our agenda to talk about are these other contracts that are coming. And we have some insight from the treasurer and the attorney regarding the preschool one, and also some information regarding the Metro contract. So get it.
So Ms. Hughes is going to go over some of the background and the requirements related to the forecast, and then I'll get into some of the revenue expenses.
Super.
And I hear you, we will be brief.
I know you
Yes,
will.
we will.
And I like that color of that sweater. I've
Thank
not
you.
seen that. It's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Is it only the treasurer's office that gets the red?
We're special.
Well, you probably should have green.
I tried. I
Red
really
is probably
tried.
a bad. That's
They
a
didn't
bad-
have the money green. I wanted the money green.
Go ahead, Kim. I'm sorry.
No
I
problem.
do like that red.
Okay, so in brief, I just want to give an overview of the 5-year forecast. So we're going to be touching on several things with regard to this presentation. First, the purpose of the forecast, the forecast and cash balances, the Ohio Fair Schools funding plan as enacted, the forecasted revenues, expenditures, and the summary. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the forecast, in short, it is to monitor and report the district's assets and liabilities and to be able to show that we can actually pay our bills. And it does focus on the general fund. These are general fund dollars that we are looking at. This tool is a plan that helps us to guide our future financial decisions that we make that are related to the district. And this is a format that is standardized and is required by the Ohio Department of Education. And it is a 3-year of actual data, and it is the current year and 4 years of forecasted information. And we file it twice a year, once in November and then again in May. The factors that influence the forecast, of course, it is the Ohio Fair Schools funding formula, any inflationary rates, of course, the pandemic spending with regards to the ESSER, the general fund, and the CLIF plan. And when I say ESSER, I'm referring to the CLIF plan for all of the ESSER dollars that will be coming back to the general fund. It's also influenced by our student enrollment projections and our collective bargaining agreements. Next slide. So on this slide, it's all about the cash. So we want to point out that within the multiple year financial plan, it's within a 3-year window. And within that 3-year window, it should not reflect any negative cash balance. So that's one thing that's very critical. And also, it's with board guidance of no new additional levies, but this does not speak to any renewals. It's okay to have renewals, just no new levies. And the keys to maintaining the positive cash balances would be, of course, the voter approval of any tax levies, tax levy renewals, that is, and the full implementation of the Fair School funding plan and the district control of budget and expenditure growth, and the anticipated CLIF plan expenditures returning back to the general fund for fiscal years 23 through fiscal year 25. Next slide, please. The Ohio School Fair funding plan, the one thing that I want to shed light on this particular slide is the fact that we've noted before that with the new funding formula, it eliminates any pass-through funding dollars that we were receiving as a result of the community schools and any scholarships. So it's going to be reducing our revenues as well as our expenditures. Also, I also want to point out that with this new fair funding plan, it anticipates a 6-year period of full implementation, but there might require some future legislation in the next 2 biennium budgets. Next slide, please. This slide shows the perspective of the district educated students versus the residents. So on the mustard color bars, that represents the school age residents, and the green bars represents the students that are actually being educated by Cincinnati Public Schools.
That's cool.
Okay.
So the mustard bar is what we were funded for. The green bar is now what we're going to be funded for. There's more residents in the city that aren't part of that because they go to non-public and they're not on vouchers. Right.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Treasurer Wagner. She knows I need help, so I appreciate you. Thank you very much.
You're doing great.
Okay, so the Ohio Fair School funding plan on this slide, this represents by grade level, and I might need a little bit of help on this. So this represents the historical information up through fiscal year 21 and projections up through fiscal year 26 by grade level groupings. And what this shows is the FTEs that are being, the percentage of FTEs that are being, what's the word I want to use? Funded per grade level grouping. Okay. So in the box up at the top, that represents the FTEs that we had on the November forecast. And then the box that's in the middle of the graph, that represents the potential loss in revenue because of the variance or the revision in the enrollment projections between the November forecast and the May forecast. Okay.
One thing if I could add to that.
Sure.
At the time that we did the November forecast, we were projecting a return to our level prior to COVID. So we were kind of anticipating a more accelerated growth back to that. Well, as we've gotten to current enrollment FTEs, what we're being funded on right now, we haven't seen as much growth this fiscal year as we anticipated. So as part of revising the forecast, we're bringing those projections down to be in line with where we're seeing the difference during this fiscal year. And so what that is trying to capture is the state funding loss related to that.
Okay. Thank you. Next slide. Thank you, Kevin. Sure. The next slide represents the Ohio Fair School funding plan calculations. So they're calculating that we would get approximately $7,200 per pupil. And of that $7,200, 43.8% is being provided by the state, while the other 56.2% is what's being received from our state and local shares per pupil. Next slide. So this is also related to the new funding plan. So these are the phase-in percentages across the 6-year implementation. So with regard to fiscal year 22, we will be receiving 16.67% of an additional funding calculation. For fiscal year 23, it'll be 33.3%. And then for fiscal years 24 through 27, it's not currently set in law. As it relates to the Disadvantaged Pupil Impact Aid, the DPIA, for this year, we're not receiving any additional funding calculation, but for next year, we will be receiving an additional 14%. And this is going to be on top of what we're currently receiving now. And again, in fiscal years 24 through 27, it's not currently set in law how much we will be receiving. So right now, I will pause and pass it on to Kevin for the revenues and expenses.
And so just to add to that on the phase-ins, as Jen has mentioned in other settings, so the school work group that proposed the school funding plan anticipated a hope for full implementation. The state chose to implement parts of the plan, but to hold those percentages down for a phase-in, which is actually, results in a big chunk of less money that we will get since it is not fully implemented. So years 3 through 6 of the plan fall in the next biennial, so it will be up to the legislature to determine what the phase-ins will be at that point.
Right, but the result of that phase-in, we would have received $88 million over a 2-year period more than we are because of the way they're phasing in the fund, not fully funding it.
So the plan was going to be semi-good, but
yeah,
it's because the way they're implementing it, it's actually
right. And the student wellness was a surprise, moving that under the formula.
So we just wanted to highlight that because that is
Yeah, that's important.
Significant.
important, and we hope the legislature will move forward with that. The next slide is just a total revenue overview for general fund. We did kind of highlight at the end, the last three bars, what the renewal levy, it will be a half-year collection in fiscal year 24, full year in 25, 26. So the top line of that will be with renewals. The lower line would be if the renewals were not provided.
So I also wanted to add, the next levy that comes up for renewal comes up in 25 on the ballot. It doesn't actually hit the forecast until fiscal year 27.
27. Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Because it's,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, go ahead.
The next slide is focusing on tax and rollbacks that come from the state. So bringing those together here. Again, the light blue on the last three, again, is those same renewal amounts. But you can see with the triennial update and some changes in millage and et cetera for the emergency levies that are fixed sum, that fixed sum will be consistent. For the others, there's the concept of the 20 mil floor. And so we've kind of reached the 20 mil floor. And so we will maybe see some residuals from that as the county keeps us at that floor for the other levies that aren't fixed sum.
And does that help us or hurt us?
It helps us. Yes. Over the life of this period, it will help us. Next slide is state aid. This is where we can really see the change, the impact of the pass-through funding. So we did want to highlight that for this year. In total, you can see the trend line does still go up. There's some tweaks within unreserved or unrestricted and restricted. But again, we're projecting out for those out years as to what the legislature will actually do. We've been conservative in our projections, though.
So restricted represents the categorical funding now, not just career tech and what was it before? It was career tech and something else before. Now it's the
English language learners.
Right, now it's English language learners, gifted, and the students with disabilities. So all those line items are now restricted, and we're going to have to report out those.
Good.
So it's just a little bit more complicated, but it's good for the kids, yeah.
Catastrophic cost changes are included there as well. Mm-hmm. Next slide is all other revenue. So I put a note on there, this encompasses a lot of items, including the TIF funding, the CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act funding, the E-rate reimbursements are in there. Also, previously, we had an open enrollment in was included, and then on the expenditure side, we had an open enrollment out. With the new funding thing, that is eliminated because now we're looking at residents or students that we educate. So there is the concept of open enrollment doesn't affect the funding, the net funding of that. Another thing I noted there in 21, we did receive some significant workers' comp reimbursements. We had been getting those annually, but then as a result of COVID, that was a way the state did provide some additional funding there. So that's another thing that affects the bump in revenues there. Next slide is an expenditure overview. Again, for this year, you'll see it on the next few slides, but again, you'll see a dip this year because of the tuition expenses, the pass-through expenses not being reflected this year. Some changes in the budget projection for next year, and then those last 2 years is really cliff effect is what's hitting that. Next slide.
That's where the cliff goes up instead of like falls off.
Right. The first page.
Need another analogy now. Mountain hillside.
Yeah, we'll come up with
I'm sure you will. Just don't make it a bridge.
So these two slides were included when we presented for the November forecast, but I highlighted there at the bottom, as Jen mentioned in the previous slide, the Promise Center moving from being ESSER funded for 23 and then coming back on the cliff in 24. So that's the circle at the bottom. Really the only difference in these two plans, or these two pages. All right, and then we'll go to the following slide. The next one is talking about school-wide pool.
There you go.
There you go. So again, just kind of detailing this process change. So giving you some background, how the school-wide pool affected the general fund is 91.7% currently of school-wide pool funds, so Fund 598, is derived from general fund dollars. The additional 8.2% is derived from Title I funds. So all of those are consolidated into 598, the school-wide pool, and then any schools that are in that grouping,
Title I eligible.
Title I eligible, are then salaries and benefits, for instance, are paid out of that pool. So one thing that's going to happen with next year's budget is those Title I dollars are going to be budgeted to the eligible schools, but then the other expenses related to salary and benefits will be borne directly in the general fund. So where this year, there was over $200,000 in transfers, so expenditures out of the general fund and into the school-wide pool. Next year, just to give perspective, had it ran through the objects this year, 156 million of that would have been salaries, about 49 million would have been benefits, and then some other categories. So it's just to kind of show how that shift would have happened this year had we operated the way we plan to operate next year. And then the last column is kind of a forecast based on our preliminary budget, what portion of next year's budget for those categories is going to relate to things that were done in school-wide pool this year.
As you all know, I have no tears about school.
I know. So I think is it the next graph that really kind of shows it visually?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
This one in particular relates to just salaries. So you'll see the lighter blue bar pulls in that 156 that this year was spent out of the 598 school-wide pool fund. But had it been in the general fund, that's kind of where we would have been. Obviously, with next year, there's COLA increase of 3% from bargaining agreements, as well as what the preliminary budget for 23 is. So again, can change, particularly within categories. And then you'll see how that goes out through 26. Next slide is just kind of an overview on benefits. I may have skipped that. Benefits, the same deal. 49 million of our benefit expense that was in 598, and that's being reflected here as well. Okay, next slide is 19. Purchase services. So the bigger, here you're going to see the cliff go both ways, but the first, from 21 to 22, this is where those pass-through dollar expenditures were posted. So that's why the big difference between last year and this year. And then there's just a little piece of purchase service that came in from school-wide pool. And then again, for next year, based on preliminary projections for the budget next year. And then the later 2 years is really where the cliff dollars are hitting. We're just trying to make these comparable. It's kind of hard to, when we have changes over 3 years of history and 5 years of future. We got 8 years, and then we're making some changes to that. Next slide will also reflect the transfers. That lighter blue column is the transfer this year for school-wide pool. Again, that's going to be reallocated going forward.
So the total expense doesn't change. We're just shifting the line item in the general ledger from a transfer to allocated out in its normal expenses. We're just trying to show you how that would reflect. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Okay.
This transfer makes sense because of the pool needs.
Yeah, okay.
All right, and the next slide is one that we like to highlight. Obviously, projecting out 5 years, a lot of things will happen between then. One, the implementation of the school funding, how our budgets perform between now and then. But this reflects the peach colored pieces reflect the renewal levy. The light gray reflects the expenditure levy. So if we continue down this path, unless, revenues ramp up or expenditures ramp down, we would be looking at a significant, the yellow line is the cash balance projection out to the 5 years. As Kim mentioned, OD, if at the end of the third year you're in a negative situation, is when they start having
The troops come to visit, yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
So we do feel like we're good through that point. And then obviously things will have to be.
As long as we control our expenses, we're good at that point. Yes. And as long as the revenues stay above the expenses, or as long as the expenses go above the revenues on any given year, you dip into your cash balance. Make it drop faster.
Well, that's what's worrisome about the preschool stuff.
Yes.
Because that's included in here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The final slide is just kind of a written summary, just to go along with everything. Overall in revenues, again, we're seeing tax revenue up, state revenue potentially down slightly. One of the factors this year is the transportation non-compliance
Oh, the
issue.
fine. Yeah, $2.4 million is being deducted off of our revenue for the transportation fine.
So certainly we're anticipating that not being the case going forward. And so hopefully that, and maybe through appeal process that will be revised. So stay tuned for that, I guess. I think I've kind of covered the expenditure items as well as the cash balances. So.
Good job, Kevin.
Very
Thank you.
good. Yes, very good. And I'm glad you did the longer one here. So this is in this 5-year forecast, there is no new levy, which was.
It's one of the basics, yep.
It is the basic.
Guidance from the board.
That's right. Okay, good. Questions, comments?
Nope.
None.
I was thinking to Ben's point, obviously, the action item will be that the board will approve the forecast Monday night.
Right.
Has to.
So it'll be added, we're waiting for this in case there was changes. And it'll be added to the treasurer's report on Monday. So we've decided because of the Wednesday deadline, we're going to post on Wednesday and then we'll revise on Monday morning. So you only have one revision. Because otherwise Ally's just chasing changes constantly.
Well,
So the CRAs will be added and the treasurer's report will be the forecast will be added for approval.
Well, appreciate that. And then also we've even talked, I've mentioned to Phyllis, haven't talked to Ben about it, but even when there is a revision, if there's, instead of trying to embed it in the hard copy or whatever, just if it could be more of an addendum as a revision.
Oh, okay.
I just think that's easier for us to locate it and then it doesn't change the numbering. And so those, I think that would be helpful, if that's okay with you. All right, now up to giant contract, futuristic, whatever, and all we need is an introduction to both of them. And come on down, as they like to say. And what is that? Price is Right?
Price is Right.
Price is Right. Come on down.
Get your pets spayed or neutered.
So bad, so bad. Who said finance committee isn't fun?
That's right.
I don't stand up.
Ryan used to say, welcome to finance where numbers are fun.
Numbers are fun. The Metro, and for folks that are here, the Metro and preschool promise contracts are up for discussion and development. For the Metro, if you can just give us an overview of what it actually is. We don't have a position yet as to what we're taking, I would assume.
There's conversations have begun. They're open with Metro regarding services for next year. The transportation department has, and I think the new superintendent has met with Metro at this point as well. In terms of contract, I reached out to Sortis Council, and there's some open questions still that I think are regarding. I mean, from Metro's side, they've talked about ensuring they know the time that passes are active. As students get passes, that's kind of an issue every year, is what is the time that they can use those passes. Also for extracurricular passes, the times that those passes would be active, the number of passes we need, the number of extracurricular passes, the one-trip passes that we use on sort of an interim basis, the contract length. There's still a few pricing issues to work out. From our side, there's also some open issues. For example, Metro has always taken a strong position that they have discretion over routing, but we have some new state mandates to comply with in terms of ensuring that our students are able to get to school with no more than one transfer. So that's kind of where there are some open discussions of some substantive issues that I think the lawyers are sort of ready to draft up what the parties determine. Does that introduce it?
That's introducing it, yes, and we didn't sign the addendum, the annual addendum as previous year.
No, and again, that was just to put some meat on that. Every year under our expiring contract, Metro would send us with their almost an invoice by way of invoice. This is what our anticipated costs were. This year, the board directed us not to sign that addendum because it excluded the extra routes, which we objected to formally in our motion. So that's why we did not sign off on the 2021-22 addendum.
Do you have any questions on the Metro piece? Yeah, I'm not happy about a 5-year after what we've just lived through. I mean, again, that's a shorter one. I know the kids were very eloquent at this thing this past week as to it was the kids from Withrow and Woodward, that there are certain neighborhoods that do not have bus service. And that I like the reference you just made that the state legislature said that the charter kids can't have more than one transfer. We've also diminished the number of kids that Metro would have to be transporting by removing our 7th and 8th graders. And it's still my understanding, and I'm sorry to wax poetic on this, or not so poetic, but the thing I don't think we've received even all of the data we had to make a public records request for. And it's my understanding too that Metro has not been able to give us the kind of information we need on unique riders. And one last thing for me, any board that's going to agree to give unlimited passes during or beyond or before or after a school day is crazy. But that was basically the only option we had. So our kids, we can't even know. Plus, our staff has told us about attendance and tardiness and the value of, or the lack of value of the first period. That was really emphasized by the kids too. And so, because they're held, because they don't get there on time, they're held like in an auditorium. So many of them are missing their first period, and many of them have to leave earlier in their, let's say, 7th period to get on the bus because it's so crowded. But if they get up there 15 minutes, it is very disruptive. And Mr. Morosky's cute. He said, well, I don't know that we're ready to fight with Metro or whatever. I'm not fighting with Metro. I'm fighting for our kids. It's impacted our instruction, and it's impacted safety. And so I'm hoping that the administration is going to be pretty adamant. And I know there's lots of good discussion to take place yet, though. But we can't get our kids to school without them, so they got that over us for sure. But those are just some of the things I heard from that. Sure, is it a charrette? Is it called a charrette? Is that the
charrette?
Charrette. Sure. It was great. I mean, I enjoyed it. It didn't last that long, but there were city council people there. There were no Metro or SORTA people there, and that was made note of by the city council people. And the only people that can make too much of a difference are the SORTA board people. That's where it is, not the administrators at Metro or SORTA. But we're going to get it resolved. It's all going to work out better than it is right now. It has to. For our kids. And now preschool, if you can go through the things that can share, oh, sorry.
Before we totally leave this one, is
Yeah,
there
please.
any action the committee is recommending?
I mean, do you have any action except for them to?
No, I mean, I think they're in the midst of the negotiation, so I think it's just to continue negotiating.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, my only action would be pay attention to what the board has been saying and what the community's saying and what the children are saying. Because the board and the community and the kids don't like what, let alone staff. We have to represent our people. We can't keep accommodating Metro and Sorta as much as we have.
And sorry, I was trying to say any action recommended for the full board. And it sounds like nothing.
No, we can't because the minutes aren't going to be able to be submitted, so we can't, there's not even an opportunity to discuss it necessarily unless we put it in board matters or something, but. Okay, good, thanks for the question. Preschool, tell us where we differ.
Oh,
Or what?
I think many places. I mean,
Skip to the bottom line, where do we
well,
differ?
I think pros and cons to where we
Yes,
are. So
go
this is an agreement that renews because the levy has renewed. I think the upside and the pros, we've now gotten a first draft of proposed red line and revisions from Cincinnati Preschool Promise.
And committee has received that.
Yep, I sent that on.
Ben may need it. You got it?
I don't.
I think the pros are that 5 years ago, there were lots of open questions about how to structure this relationship and just to bring back some of that, the trusted entity, which became the United Way, the Preschool Expansion Organization, or PEO, which ultimately became the Cincinnati Preschool Promise Board, how delegates were going to be appointed to that board. All of those were things that we invented 5 years ago, and structurally, credit to the people who have done this work. It's worked very well. I don't think there's a lot of open questions either from Cincinnati Public Schools side or the Cincinnati Preschool Promise side about how to structure the relationship. So I think that's a success that we should not minimize. That's right. Open questions involve lots of the same open questions that we had when this relationship was founded, including what types of private preschool providers are going to be eligible for tuition assistance dollars. I think there's a request to expand that to 2-star providers. Which preschool providers, private preschool providers, would be eligible for quality assurance dollars. I think there's a request to expand that to 3, 4, 5-star providers, which originally envisioned just, the higher quality providers. The board committed tuition assistance dollars because we were trying to increase the number of high quality seats. The lower quality, at least as rated by ODE providers, the commitment was to offer some quality improvement dollars, which would bring them up to those higher star ratings by ODE. There's some requests by Preschool Promise, which, frankly, I would let them defend about why they think it makes sense to expand the use of both of those buckets of dollars. There's some open questions, as there were 5 years ago, about what students should be eligible for Preschool Promise dollars. Specifically, I think the school board has, at least the direction we've gotten from the school board, is that this is really a preschool program for 3 and 4-year-olds that is a pre-kindergarten program designed to improve kindergarten performance and readiness for school year type programming, for school day type programming, school age children eligibility. There is, again, some request to expand that pool of students who would be eligible. To be fair, CPS has expanded its services, especially in the last 2 years, to some summer scholars programming and things like that. So some open questions. I'm not, Vera Brooks, Jen Wagner, myself have met, and we have some response and some of our own interests, but I'm not sure whether this is the appropriate
I
time.
just want to correct something.
Yeah.
We use ESSER for summer scholars, not
That's
levy
true.
money.
That's right. That's right.
But they use levy money.
Yeah. So again, that sort of kicks off the discussion.
Question? my concerns are, having lived through it, I think it's a tremendous success. And we were building this thing as we were asking people to vote for it. And it was kind of written in invisible ink to a certain extent while we were asking people to make this great leap. There's a community-driven kind of thing, just like outside CPS has really been a community-driven thing instead of just us. I do recall the issue about the number two, this 2-star.
Mm-hmm.
That it was very much guaranteed to the people that voted for this that it was about quality, and it was a 3, 4, 5, and that the 2 buckets that you had, you could get this or you could get this, but you couldn't get both. And I think that's gone far, And I think too, a great picture of the preschool deserts. I won't say they've disappeared, but there's very, very few of them compared to where we started. So I think it's been a great accomplishment. I worry about the financial piece of it if we keep spending. And then there's some sort of issue about special ed and what we're paying or what we're not, but I think the CPS is, didn't Vera present something to us in finance, I think?
She did.
Because the preschool folks did a great
Mhm.
presentation, and then
Mhm.
Vera did too, but there was some, it might be good to find out where they are on that, if there's still some conflict. Are you aware of that?
Early on, the biggest issues were the private providers didn't know how to access those services. And so Vera's group has done an amazing job educating and providing assistance. And so I think it was they just needed to be updated on the data, how many students have been. But as CPP plans their growth, they have to recognize that the special ed costs of that growth are our burden to bear out of that money. And so that has to grow too.
Gotcha.
Because we support the private provider students through special ed needs, through diagnostic and itinerant teachers.
What's the hope to get a resolution or get it was gruesome the first time through. I mean, I think it was like 11 drafts, if I recall, back and forth.
That's an
At the very
understatement.
least.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's probably triple that.
Yeah, I can show them to you on
Yeah,
my
I know,
computer
you
if
have
you
a
want.
stack?
Yeah.
Okay, great. But call me about that resolution if you would, whenever you get a chance for Mr. Wilson. These 2 things, the Metro contract and the preschool item, will be on the agenda next month as well. If you'd be ready to do any kind of an update, and if start updating the board fully. So that would be great.
Will do.
Anything else for the good of the order? Well, I've enjoyed it. I don't know that numbers are fun. My fun with numbers ended in pre-cal. And if you have a civil engineer for a dad, that's an ugly experience. I really like the arts, Dad. Okay. At any rate, great staff work as always. And thank you, Madam Treasurer. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Do we have anybody waiting to talk?
We do not.
Hallelujah. Now that's transparency, isn't it? We're so transparent, nobody even wants to talk to us.